Hello, everyone. Welcome back to CSL podcast. We're back today to have a look at the Western Conference for this upcoming season. And today I'm joined by Washington Wizards GM Gary. Gary, it's good to have you on. Talk about the other conference on the other half of the league from you for this episode. Be interested to get your point of view on some of these teams because you don't necessarily probably look at them all the time. You're probably more focused on the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, no doubt about that because, playoffs on the east side. But there's still a lot of intriguing teams in the west, especially, first time ever two-time champ. The Kings is from the west after all. So you got to pay attention to that conference as well because the final boss is right there. So.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll kick off today, kind of going through the conference and looking at each division and kind of what's happened. And I can see there, for some reason, the Houston Rockets have loaded up on my screen, but they don't have the right team roster. So bear with me 1 second whilst I quickly change that. I guess whilst we're talking about that, looking at that, I'm doing that, Gary. In terms of the Rockets, they had an interesting off-season, didn't they, to say the least?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think that most of the people in the league can agree that they probably have the best off-season out of everybody thus far. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, picking up James Harden was obviously a massive move for them. They also picked up Michael Porter in the draft itself. So, a good off season in all. Probably one of the elite teams in the Eastern Conference, in the Western Conference now, would you say?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. I mean, you look at the starting five right now, it's Kemba Walker, Karl-Anthony Towns, James Harden, Malik Monk, Dragon Bender. They got some decent role players like Eric Mika and Kevon Looney. I mean, this team is the depth is a little bit of an issue, but the top 6 or 7 guys is probably the nastiest one in the league.
Yeah, I mean, it screams the Dallas Mavericks from a few years ago, the Brett team that just had talent everywhere. Obviously, that team didn't quite go all the way, but this team's probably slightly more balanced than the Mavericks team, would you say? In that they have elite players at every position that kind of complement each other.
Yeah, because I remember the Dallas, like they have Paul George, Derrick Rose, and I think Harden for a while. Then they switch it to Steph Curry. But yeah, I think this team is actually a little bit more star-studded, just because you got arguably one of the best defensive point guard in the league in Kemba. Then we all saw how good Malik Monk was in the playoff last year, and he's only second-year player. And you also got James freaking Harden, who's been MVP conversation every year, and Karl-Anthony Towns who's still developing. So it's a nasty team.
Yeah, and I think the question that's kind of on everyone's mind though is with Michael Porter. Obviously, they kind of picked him. They didn't really want Michael Porter. They were obviously looking to get Kaiser Gates, but the Pistons drafted him slightly earlier. Do you see Michael Porter staying on this team by the trade deadline?
I think he's going to give some playing time because I know Biz said in staying that he wanted to run a bigger rotation and keep his main guns healthy. So I assume that Michael Porter would probably get quite a few minutes as his rookie. But I think that if he underperforms, it becomes a huge liability. And I think he's going to become a big trade chip, kind of like Kevin Knox for the Boston Celtics.
Yeah. I think if the right piece came up, I think Kyrus wouldn't hesitate to move him. My view is I don't see Michael Porter lasting up until the trade deadline on the Houston Rockets. I expect him to get someone to put them even further over the top for this year. But I guess the Rockets obviously at 46 and 36 last year because they had some horrendous injuries towards the back end of the season. This team's probably do you think a 50 to 55, possibly a 60 win team now?
Yeah, I think this team should at least be, if all the chemistry everything works out, then it should be at least a 55 to 60 win team, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll see how they do come playoff time because that's kind of where it matters for this team with all that talent.
Yep.
So should we move on to the Dallas Mavericks? So the team we were kind of comparing the Rockets to from a few years ago, gone a completely different direction now. Obviously, losing Paul George was a massive loss for the Mavericks, but they've made some interesting free agency signings and picked up Kostas Atakumbo in the draft. Where do you see this team fitting in the Western Conference? Do you think they're still a playoff team? I mean, they've still got Rose and Kenneth Faried and Ed Davis and some of the guys who've been there for the championship runs that they've tried, but they've obviously lost Paul George, which is a significant loss for any team.
Yeah, I think right now without a general manager, this team is not a playoff team at all. Even if a general manager, it'll be tough. It's because Derrick Rose has aged a lot now, along with Kenneth Faried. I mean, those guys are pretty much fossils at this point. Neither of those guys are going to be a great number one or even number two option on a good team. And they did sign a bunch of one-year contract as a bunch of good role players. But I think what Brett was doing, who was the caretaker GM at this offseason, is that they noticed all of their own first-round picks. So I think what they're trying to do is just trying to stat pad some of these signings and then eventually trade them. If a new GM comes in that's smart enough, we'll trade them for future assets to a contending team. So that's all I'm seeing right now. So this team's probably just going to slowly go into a rebuild. And, and I think Brett did a really good job just signing some of these veterans because somebody's going to bite by trade deadline. They're trying to push for the playoff spot. So.
Yeah, I think this is a team where it's kind of a shop window for every single player on this roster now. They've signed a lot of guys to 1-year deals, so they're going to be a active participant next off season, I think. Rose and Faried are probably the two that you would expect to be probably dealt if a GM comes in, but that all depends on whether that happens or not. But if this team stays where it is, Gary, do you think they're going to make the playoffs, or do you think they'll just fall short?
I think this will be one of those teams going to be probably around 9th or 10th spot, falling short. I just don't think a playoff run is going to be a target for this team, even with a GM. So I think they're just going to miss their playoff and go into the lottery and start rebuilding.
Okay. So we're probably thinking less than the 44 win mark that they had last year. Probably going to be about below 0.500, I think.
Agreed. I say 36 wins probably.
Okay. So we move on to a team that does have a GM now, the Memphis Grizzlies, who haven't really made that many moves. I guess the interesting one is that they picked up Tyler Ulis from, I believe it was the Clippers, for what was eventually Colin Sexton and some other, possibly a future first-round pick, I think. They lost Montrezl Harrell as well in a trade transaction. I can't remember what they got back for that. But they managed to retain some of their key free agents in Bismarck Biyombo and Zach Levine, I believe, as well, this free agency. So 38 and 44 last year. Where do you see the Grizzlies settling in again this year? With a GM as well, remember, this time.
Yeah, they have a GM as well, but I believe the GM is pretty new to this Sim League stuff as well, so experience could be a factor in this division. I'm going to say they will probably miss the playoffs just because I just don't think the guy's experienced enough to fully utilize some of his weapons. Because I think this team has some talent, but it's going to require a lot of micromanaging in regards to rotation and strategies. Because, Zach Levine, at this current engine, he's a huge defensive liability. So you got to know how to hide him and utilize him. Then you got guys like, Chris Middleton and Draymond Green, who all have good talent. Once again, they have a major weakness in poor discipline. So, and then you got the Bogdanovich bros, who are pretty specialized. Either one of them is Bojan, I think, is a good three-point shooter, and Bogdan's a really good slasher. But I don't know. This team just feels like an odd mix right now. I just don't see them as a playoff caliber team.
Yeah, I mean, I probably agree with you. I think they'll be close to the playoffs, but I think they might be one of these teams that probably just misses out in the Western Conference. I mean, it's a team that I think is built really well for the new DGS engine in that Biyombo will look good there. Levine will be, his defensive frailties will be hidden and his scoring will look very good. He'll probably make a jump. Chris Middleton absolutely will make a jump in the new engine in terms of his 3-point attempts, which will probably take him from a good starter to probably to an all-star level talent. I think it's kind of for the Grizzlies, it's just consolidate what you've got this year, probably miss the playoffs, pick up a lottery piece again, and then go into the new DDS engine and probably make a significant jump from borderline playoffs to probably a solid playoff team in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I think they're kind of similar to the map situation this year because they own their own pick. So if I was the Memphis Grizzlies GM right now, I'm going to try to sell some of my veteran guys like Bismarck, Biombo, maybe the Bogdanovich Bros, and Shane Larkin, stuff like that. Trying to get some future assets, cap relief, or something like that to prepare for the next offseason. Because I think if you can find a good number one, number two guy in this draft, a pair of Draymond Green and Chris Middleton, along with Zach LaVine and the new engine, I think that could be a pretty good core four right there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we don't know a lot about the current draft class, but you look at some of the names in there, and I'm thinking if they can get a top 5 pick to add to Middleton and to add to LaVine, this team could be a really good team.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Just imagine somebody like a Zion that scores inside, and then you can feed it outside to Middleton, and even Draymond has a 3-point shot, along with Zach LaVine, who knows probably the best 3-point shooter in the league now that Klay Thompson has declined. So it could be really good if they can get somebody in top 5 like an inside scorer or a slasher like that.
Yeah,
in the new engine.
Yeah, completely agree. So we move on to another team in the same division, the New Orleans Pelicans. Had a pretty down year last year, predominantly because of some GM changes that they had at the start of the year. Anthony Davis going down through injury. Some significant additions this year, Gary, though.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, they got Paul freaking George, another guy that's always in the MVP conversation, arguably one of the most accomplished player in CSL history. I mean, sure, PG-13 is a little bit older now. He started regressing, but he's still a very good player. And you pair him up with what arguably the best player in CSL and Anthony Davis, you pretty much have two of the top 5, top 8 players in the league right now. It's hard.
Yeah, I think it'll be a real interesting sort of test for the league here in that, yeah, as you said, and I know Miles said it in the other podcast that Green Bay does, they've got probably definitely two of the top 10 players in the league in the same roster, and I don't think any other team really has that at the moment. And then you look at that, they've got Mo Harkless, who they picked up, which was a really good addition, I felt. But then you go beyond that, and then there's just a real mixed bag of some players who are okay rotation pieces in Bryce Johnson, Joe Jackson, and you've got other pieces where I question whether they should even be in the CSL. So things like LiAngelo Ball, who they picked up in the second round, Yuta Watanabe, I believe his name is, Cole Aldridge. I mean, these are players who still signify the New Orleans Pelicans from the past few years. So it's going to be an interesting test, I think, to see whether George and Davis can pull this team into being a contender with Mo Harkless and drag some of these players with them who probably won't be on other rotations in other top teams.
Yeah, I mean, this team on paper, you would think they should make the playoffs, but once again, we have a really inexperienced general manager here that's in reign. So, and for a team that's as shallow as this one, you've got to be able to, micromanage and figure out some rotation. Because Anthony Davis isn't exactly the model for, durability. This guy, I feel like just like in real life, he always gets hurt. Paul George is always healthy. I think it's one season they went out and that was it. But those two guys are pretty old, so you got to manage their minutes and maximize the other role players like Harkless, Joe Jackson, and Bryce Johnson, and all those guys. So, I mean, on paper, you would think this team would make the playoffs, but I think it's a pretty tough project because it's just such a shallow team.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll make the playoffs. I think just because of George and Davis. If they stay healthy even for 50 games, they'll probably win, let's say, 30 of those. And then remember the remaining sort of, how many games it is, 20 odd games. They'll probably win, even without them, they'll probably win 30%, which will probably just get them over the 45 mark, which in the Western Conference we've seen has probably got teams in at the 8th seed. So I think they'll make the playoffs. I think it's just a case of whether they can keep George and keep Davis healthy for that playoff run and just basically play both of them for 40 minutes in the playoffs and hope that's enough, just elite talent to pull the rest of the rotation through against some of the other teams who've got good elite players, but some players who are nowhere near as good as Paul George and Anthony Davis.
Yeah, no doubt. Especially they don't own their own first round pick this year, so I feel like you just have to go for it. But if let's say bad luck strikes and one of those big stars go down, then I think it would be a good idea for them to trade or start trading away one of those two big guns for some future packages. But for now, yeah, definitely go for it. So.
Yeah, I'll be excited to see the Pelicans this year. That's one team that in the Western Conference I'm looking forward to see how they do, because they had a great offseason, picked up some good talent and have improved the roster finally with Anthony Davis. So bit of a wild card, I think, for me in the Western Conference.
Yep, no doubt. It reminds me of a Golden State when they had Harden and Kevin Durant. So.
Yeah. So moving on to the San Antonio Spurs. So a team that was 26-56 last year, made some interesting additions and probably good additions this year. And I mean, I'll list them for you, Gary. So Baka, Aminu, Harrell, TJ Warren, Dion Waiters, to what is already Mohamed Bamba, Terry Rozier, Frank Nitikalinka. I cannot say that. Frank N. Let's go with Frank N. Frank N sounds good.
Yeah.
So they've added some significant talent this offseason. Where do you see them playing out this year?
I have them slotted as one of the most improved team this year.
Is it playoffs though? Do you think that's a playoff team now?
I feel like with the West now looking at it, because so many teams have weakened. Like you got teams like OKC that's trying to rebuild and stuff like that now, and Dallas slowly fading away. Memphis, same thing. I think they have a chance to make the playoffs. This really just depends on how the Spurs GM will do strategy wise, because they have some really good talent, and if Frank N along with Mo Bamba and even Davis Bertans have a good training camp, I think you have a really good looking team right here. I mean, Frank N is supposed to be, when he was drafted, he had a lot of hype as like a two-way point guard. And then you got Davis Bertans, who has potential to be one of the best three-point shooters in the league. And I love Montrezl Harrell. I feel like that all that guy does is just produces, plays defense, rebounds, even scores. And you got Waiters Island, one of those bipolar players can get really hot or really cold. And I think Mo Bamba has a ton of potential as well. He just needs to develop. So I think it really just depends on the training camp. Those guys have a good training camp. I see them as a lower playoff seed team.
Yeah, I think lower playoff seed is probably fair. I think a lot of how well this team will do this year depends on how Frank N develops as a point guard. I know they've got Terry Rozier, who they probably will play at point guard for some period of time, but for me, that's probably the only glaring weakness that they have to not be a playoff team. For me, I haven't seen him make the jump that I would have expected. So maybe he does this training camp. Maybe it's the one that gives him the significant boost that he needs to be a great point guard in the CSL, because he has a lot of potential, but I don't think we've necessarily seen it yet.
Yeah, it's definitely going to develop. Depends on the development of those young guys. But, Terry Rozier to God there, he did pretty good for the Spurs. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how him and Waiters get along. Because I feel like both those guys are kind of like those bipolar guys, like going 10 games looking like MVP, and then next 20 games is like, what are they doing? Shooting like 30% in the field. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's probably why they've ended up on the Spurs, in that they've both kind of bounced around for a little while now.
Yeah.
They always are with a team for a couple of seasons, and then they get frustrated with them and trade them on. So we'll see if they last in San Antonio, whether they get dealt. But hopefully, whilst one is cold, the other one is hot, and they kind of have that balance. I guess that's what they're hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be a good place if you can figure out who's getting hot, who's getting cold, and just switch off back and forth. So it's not a bad idea, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay, so probably saying the Spurs might be a playoff team this year in the West. I think a low playoff team, but there's some significant upgrades that they've made.
Yep.
So moving across to the Oklahoma City Thunder, team that was 60-22 last year, obviously were the reigning champions, didn't get back there this year. Dealt Michael Kidd-Gilchrist for Kawhi Leonard. It's probably the significant move they've made, but they've also verbaled in Roland Hollis Jefferson and Justin Holiday, I believe, from the Bulls, because I had a look at their trade block and I think they were posted on there. So I'm not sure what's going back in that deal, but they are picking up 2 solid players there. And obviously then they dealt a couple of future first rounders for Devin Robinson and Deonta Davis, I believe, in the draft this year. No real significant changes other than those guys. Do you feel that's enough to get OKC back to 60 wins? I know the GM Andrew has said that he's looking to rebuild, but based on the current roster structure, where do you see Oklahoma sitting?
Still a very good team. I mean, even though Bledsoe and Klay Thompson got hit with pretty big regressions, but if you look at this roster right now, about those future impending deals, yeah, they can easily win 50, 55 games easily. But I think what Andrew's trying to do, like you said, mentioned before, he's trying to rebuild now. And I think Kawhi already got verbal to the Bulls for Justin Holiday and Rondé Hollis Jefferson. I'm sure there's some other stuff added in too, but it's going to be interesting. I think Andrew right now is probably just going to play it by the ear. If nobody bites on his players, then might as well just go for a playoff run. And if somebody bites on guys like Klay Thompson or, who else, Eric Bledsoe or even Jordan McRae, then he's going to start rebuilding. I mean, it's a pretty fluid situation, but right now I have them slotted as a playoff team. But if those big deals start happening, then they're going to go rebuilding. So, but for now, I'm just going to say, yeah, playoff team.
Yeah, I mean, they're a playoff team. I think a lot. I'm not sure what they're dealing to get those 2 guys back from Chicago, but providing they get those 2 and don't really give away too much in terms of Klay or Stanley Johnson Jr. or Eric Bledsoe or someone like that, if they can, get those guys in, keep the remaining sort of core guys, this team for me is probably still a 55 to 60 win team, because they've had some regression from Klay Thompson and Eric Bledsoe, but they're still good starter players in this league. I think that, I mean, depends on what Andrew does and how significantly he wants to rebuild straight away. But if this team stays as it is, I think there's still a shot in the Western Conference for them this year. I don't see them regressing as much as, Andrew's probably making them out to be at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Even looking at the roster, I think that getting guys like a Justin Holiday and Rondé Hollis Jefferson looks like he just want to beef up perimeter defense. I think the biggest X factor if he's going down this route is how Stanley Johnson would do now that he's going to get even more shot attempts as Bledsoe and Klay Thompson both regress as scorers.
Yeah, that's true.
So Stanley's going to be getting more touches. And we all know Stanley can be really good or really bad. So it just depends on which version of Stanley Johnson will become. He's going to be the alpha dog on offense now. So.
Yeah, and maybe that was one of the reasons why he traded for Kawhi Leonard and dealt away but Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, because Kawhi Leonard's a bit more of a scorer, so he might keep the touches away from Stanley Johnson Jr. a little bit, which means he'll still remain fairly, as efficient as he can be and won't be chucking up, 25 shots a game. So maybe that was his thinking around that move as well.
Yep.
I think OKC are still in good shape for this year. Still a contender in the Western Conference, despite the regressions and some of the moves they've made.
Yeah, I mean they had to make some moves that may lose value on paper due to the hard cap issues, so you can't blame him for that. So, and I know he still did a pretty good job coming out because everybody was expecting him to just complete cap out and trade everybody away, but he still managed to keep his core pieces. So I think he did a pretty solid job.
And they kept Jordan McRae as well, which was a good re-sign for them. So yeah, we'll see how OKC do, and this roster could possibly change, but if it doesn't, still a good contender in the Western Conference.
No doubt.
So we move on to the Portland Trailblazers, who were 50-32 last year. So I've got down here significant losses. I don't think I've necessarily lost anyone. I managed to retain my guys. I've got my two key additions here, Gary, for you. Dario Saric and Nikola Jokic are the 2 that I've got down. How do you see my team playing out, I guess, is the question to ask.
I think this team's gonna be very good once again. I mean, last few seasons, you've been doing really well, and the core is still there. You got Marcus Smart back, which is probably your biggest worry this off season. You got him back, and then you even got your solid role players guy back, like Gordon Hayward and KJ McDaniels and stuff like that. So I think the team's gonna just run it back with some solid depth addition like Nikolai Jokic and Dario Saric. But I think this team just once again looks like one of those blue collar teams is going to do really well once again. And if OKC goes the rebuild route, then the division is definitely yours in my opinion. So also be interesting to see how you're going to use Nikolai Mirotic this year, because I know last year you didn't want to mess with the team chemistry while he's out because Henry Ellison did very well. So curious to see how you're going to fit him back into the puzzle this year.
Yeah, I think I've got a couple of interesting questions. I mean, obviously signing Marcus Smart was huge for us. Getting someone like Saric on what was, I think, a cap salary tax exception that we had. I'm amazed nobody picked him up because rating wise, he's still very good. Yeah, he's not a great shooter, but that can be worked on. So I'm really surprised that no one jumped on him. It was just a value move for him. But yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll be back at the 50 win mark. I think normally I project this team to be between sort of 43 and 52 wins. That's kind of where I see our sort of 9 game limit. But we'll see how it plays out. I think we'll be playoffs hopefully. But yeah, should be interesting to see how Saric and Jokic do for us. I think in rotation minutes. I'm excited to see that.
Yep, just like the real life Blazers, man. I got a lot of white players on here. Let's see, Wilson, Ingles, Mirotic, Hayward, Saric, and Jokic. And Brook Lopez is mixed, so it doesn't count. But yeah,
yeah, not by choice, by what was available, definitely. So let's move on to the Denver Nuggets. So they were 43 and 39 last year. Obviously had some, I believe they had a couple of injury issues, which kept them at sort of that 43 win mark. But another year of Jason Tatum developing, Drummond, John Wall, sort of staying. They managed to retain James Young as well. The only key addition I've got here for them was Chandler Parsons, which, to be honest with you, is not really that much of a key addition. But I mean, I'm expecting them to make the jump this year. I don't know how you see the Nuggets shaping up this year.
Well, they're going to be a good team this year once again. Just I guess how much they progress it really just depends on how much Jason Tatum develops. I believe Tatum actually got one of those crazy boosts, so he's going to be scary. So if he turns out well in training camp, I think he's going to become the number one option for this team. And when you have someone like Andre Drummond or John Wall, your number two option, that's usually in pretty damn good shape for your starting five. So. And they did a really good job of retaining some of the key guys like Travion Graham, a good 3-and-D specialist, and James Young, arguably is one of the more valuable signings in this free agency. I mean, this guy is pretty much a guaranteed six-man of the year candidate. And even when he's a starter, he's a very good starter as well. So I think Miles did a really kind of quiet off season, but did a really good job just retaining all the pieces that he needs. And then adding guys, some veterans, bench players who can play 10 to 15 minutes, like Parsons or, Kennedy Meeks and David Stockton. And it turns out to be a quiet but, really useful offseason for them.
Yeah, I agree. Quiet off season, but it's more about retaining guys for the Nuggets. I guess when I look at them in comparison to, I mean, the teams that we compared to is obviously OKC, the Suns, and the Kings. And I guess the difference I have between the Nuggets and those three teams that are the elite Western Conference teams is that probably where the Suns and the Kings are and OKC are probably like eight deep with really, really top tier guys. I look at the Nuggets and I'd say they're probably only about 6 deep with top tier guys. They're probably missing those one or two additional pieces of players who are really, any other team, they'd be a starter, but on a championship team, they're just really solid rotation guys who come in and can light it up and, win a game on their own or, provide fantastic defense stopping ability that they need in the second unit. And I don't necessarily know whether the Nuggets have got that yet. I think that they're probably, in my opinion, 2 good pieces away from going from being that sort of second tier playoff team in the Western Conference to being one of the elite teams in the Western Conference.
Yeah, they're definitely not the elite team right there right now. But I mean, I think a lot just depends on how Jason Tatum develops. If he turns out to be one of those, stud development in their training camp, then they have a really good big three of John Wall, Tatum, and Drummond compared to a lot. So, I mean, yeah, right now I see the stadium behind you guys, and if OKC sticks around and not rebuild completely, then I still have them behind those 2 teams. But they're getting pretty close. So.
Yeah, I mean, my other question is not necessarily for this season with the Nuggets, but looking at Tatum and his development life cycle as a player, and you look at John Wall and his age, are we going to start seeing the best of Tatum just as John Wall falls off that cliff as 35, 36? And then all of a sudden the Nuggets are going to have to basically do a semi-retool rebuild around Tatum again. I'm just wondering whether the window is going to close on them quicker than they imagine.
Yeah, I think Miles' plan, he mentioned, I talked to him a couple of times. He said that he pretty much has like a 2 to 3 years window right now with Wall, Drummond, and stuff like that. So Tyler Stone, all those guys. You notice most of their contract structures, they pretty much all end around the same time that Jason Tatum is due for the big extension, which is his 3-year window. So I think his plan is just to see what happens with this core. Maybe they can make a big move by trade deadline to acquire one more big pieces. And if they fail the next 2 or 3 years, then so be it. They'll just start rebuilding. They have their own picks. They're gonna have plenty of cap space with all those big contracts coming off the books, and you got a good core piece in Jason Tatum. So
yeah, true, absolutely true. And we know they did push the Suns all the way last year. So if they can get in the playoffs, they get a lucky sort of couple of rounds in terms of matchups, they could easily be in the conference finals before they know it with this rotation, I think, and this roster. So moving on to the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have a GM now, I believe, after a bit of a transition. Not much to talk about in terms of key additions. I mean, they drafted Kyle Wiltjer, I believe his name is, in the first round. They managed to keep the likes of Cousins and Weber. Weber on a fantastic deal, I believe. And then they drafted 4 second-round selections. So, I mean, for me, Gary, the interesting thing about this is I look at those 4 second-round picks, and I'll be interested just to see how many minutes they get, because I don't think any other team has got that many second-round players as rookies coming into their rotation and into their roster. I guess they were 38 and 44 last year. They lost Delon Wright. Is this team still going to be in that middle of the pack in the Western Conference?
I think the smart thing for them to do is just start rebuilding now. I mean, they got some good young pieces in Caleb Swanigan, Tyus Jones, even Kyle Wiltjer, and Briante Weber on the really good value deal. Those are some good solid pieces to start a rebuild. And they finally have their own pick this year, along with the next few years as well, I believe. So that's going to – actually, no, they don't have one. Actually, they don't have their own pick next year. They have it for this year, though. So
okay.
I think this will be a good year to try to get into this draft and snag a guy that perhaps going to be a number 1, number 2 guy in the future.
And then probably makes sense for them to completely rebuild then.
Yeah, and then trade away some of their still valuable pieces like DeMarcus Cousins or Avery Bradley and Bradley Beal, stuff like that. I'm sure those guys will probably get a few inquiries when during trade deadline when some of the middle tier teams are trying to push for the playoffs. So I think they're going to be sellers. If there's a GM there, they should be sellers.
Yeah, and I would argue even Briante Weber could be a trade piece as well, given the great value contract he has.
Yeah, I mean, if we can get a really good value deal for him, yeah, I think that on this team, nothing should be off the block. Everything should be available just to see what kind of market value you can get for these guys. But as of right now, yeah, this team just go for a rebuild and trying to strike big in this draft.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of the current roster sort of structure, do you kind of see them probably not being down there with the worst teams in the league, and probably not being a playoff team? Do you still see this roster as it's currently constructed being that 38-44 team that we saw last year?
Yeah, I think honestly, I think with a new inexperienced GM, I think their roster would probably have a worse record. Just even if they don't do any moves at all, just because Roxy has always been good at one of those good GMs that knows how to really play with the rotations and all the X and O's. And now that he's gone and replaced with a new guy, I just don't think the new guy is going to be able to maximize the roster like Roxy did. And
Hmm.
I think this team's probably going to be like maybe a 34 win team, such.
Yeah, and I guess that, as we said, that probably works quite nicely for them because they own their first round pick this year. They don't own it next year, so if they can get into a top 5 selection this year, that will set them up hopefully to be on the right path over the next couple of years.
Exactly. I mean, if they suck this year, it's a blessing in disguise, in my opinion. So might as well
Yeah,
go for it.
yeah. So moving on to the Utah Jazz, a team that probably we talked about a couple of times last year as underachieving,
Mm-hmm.
finishing 34-48 after the previous year being a Western Conference contender. Really, we could have said they've lost Bryce Cotton, which is the biggest loss they've had this year. They picked up DeAnthony Melton, I believe, in the draft. Prior to that, obviously, they managed to pick up Kyrie Irving. The Jazz, surely, Gary, this team is a playoff team now.
Yeah, I mean, like just like last year on paper, this team should easily make the playoffs. I mean, there were some really good players. There were really good 1-2 punch of Porzingis along with Kyrie Irving, and you got some really good supporting pieces like Daniel Hamilton, Jalen Jones, Gorgie Dang, and even Mr. Overpay Fuquan Edwin is a very solid player as well. But for some reason, it just did not click last year with Cotton, Kyrie, and all those guys. So maybe losing Cotton will actually help the team. Who knows? Maybe he was the problem. I mean,
Yeah,
I didn't really.
I'm not too
It
sure
could
what
be
their
the problem.
record was with Irving and Cotton and everyone, but I think their record did improve with Kyrie Irving because I believe there was some talk about them possibly making the playoffs at one point. I think they had to win like 80% of their remaining games, but they came fairly close. I think closer than people expected. So if they
Yeah,
could probably keep that up, they should be a solid playoff team this year.
yeah. I think they need to figure out how to, for the perfect rotation and sub matrix to maximize this roster because the talent is still there. I mean, I just think that maybe they're maybe 1 or 2 moves away from being one of the top teams in the West again. They just need to
Mm.
figure out because right now I think their depth is the big and their wing position, the small forward position is kind of suspect. But I mean, they can actually not small forward, should I say shooting guard because Daniel Hamilton plays small forward. So
Yeah,
if they can figure out the shooting guard situation and some bench pieces, then I think they're in good shape.
yeah, I think so. I think this team should be a solid playoff team this year. Whether they've got enough elite talent at the moment to go further than the first round of the playoffs, I don't know. But we've seen Porzingis completely take over games before a couple of years ago, so maybe he can do that again and pull this team back over the top.
Yep, just need him to stay healthy.
Exactly. Yeah, stay healthy and they'll be okay. So moving on to the Phoenix Suns, 60-22 last year. Lost Donovan Mitchell in a trade which brought in Shaquille Harrison. That's probably the only significant move they've had. I mean, I've got Mirza Teletovic here, but I don't think he's going to play any minutes for the Phoenix Suns. I just put that for laughs because I think he was an exception or something that they picked him up on. But at 16-22 with a young point guard in Shaquille Harrison, is this team now good enough to finally get back and win a championship?
Yeah, I mean, once again, this team is stacked as usual. They got Isaiah Austin back, Okaro White back. Pretty much the whole gang is back. I mean, sure, they lost Jonathan Mitchell, but Mitchell didn't really play much minutes last year, anyways, because they got Isaiah Taylor. So there's not really need. Mitchell is more of an asset for trading later, which they did to cash him for Shaq Harrison, along with the Magic's pick this year, which is I think is a very good deal for them. And looking at the way this roster is constructed right now, with the addition of Shaq Harrison, I think once again won't surprise me if they lead the league in wins. It's just a very talented roster. And some of the younger guys still developing, like Malik Beasley, even freaking Isaiah Taylor is still growing.
Yeah,
and you got Isaiah Whitehead, who are also developing as well, along with Zach Collins and Terrence Ferguson. So they have some really good young guys that are already good players and are still developing. So this team should be a juggernaut once again.
yeah. I don't see any flaws in this team as per usual with the Phoenix Suns. I think Shaquille Harrison has addressed the need for a good defensive point guard. Whether he will develop into being an elite point guard, I don't necessarily know yet. But based on current ratings, he's going to fit in perfectly in that backcourt with Isaiah Taylor. And then beyond that, they've still got the usual suspects and the usual depth. And 60 wins is probably where they'll be again because, as you said, Mitchell didn't play that much for them. He was more of a trade piece. So they're probably adding. I mean, it'd be scary to think about that. They're probably going to add possibly 5 wins by getting Harrison. That's amazing to think that. But yeah, they'll be a contender again. I think.
Oh yeah, no doubt. I'm just hoping that maybe they can actually win it all this year, so Duck will get bored and just blow the whole team up.
that sounds
That's what I can hope
perfect.
for.
That sounds perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah, if the CSL gods are listening, if they can win this year and then just decide to trade every single piece, that'd be great because that'll be a less Western Conference team that I have to worry about. So yeah, let's go with that.
Exactly.
Moving on from one powerhouse Western Conference team to the current champions, the Sacramento Kings, another Western powerhouse team. Key losses are just Ricky Rubio. They managed to add Brandon McCoy in the draft. I mean, a team that loses Ricky Rubio, but still has the likes of Isaiah Cousins, Jalen Adams to hold the point guard position. Is this team again? Has this team made enough of a drop off to not be in the championship hunt this year?
No, this team is gonna be fine once again. I mean, he did a good job just fixing the finances and retain all the core pieces like Nurkic, Solomon, and Johnson and McGarry. Sure, losing Rubio's kind of sucked, but the 3 other young point guards who are developing, I'm sure, with a good training camp, can easily take over that spot. I mean, Derek White, yesterday hates BT for drafting him till this day, missing him by one pick. He's going to be a very good point guard. You got Jalen Adams, who has a very, very unique skill set. And I think with a good training camp, he could be a very intriguing option at point guard. And Isaiah Cousins has proven to be a pretty solid point guard. And with more minutes, I'm sure he'll probably play even better. So there's no problem at point guard for them. Rubio was just more of a luxury, in my opinion. And I think they're just fine with this roster they have right now. I'm looking at their pick situation. They got a bunch of future first rounders once again, so this team's gonna be set for a while. And like I said, hopefully maybe Brian will get bored and blow the team up or something.
Yeah, I mean they did an excellent job. I know they retained Solomon, Nurkic, McGarry, and Nick Johnson as well. So they retained most of the key guys in free agency, which was brilliant in terms of them going back and trying to go for a repeat. They were fairly good deals. I think the Solomon deal was slightly more than he anticipated to resign him on, but yeah, as you said, they've got loads of picks going forward. They've got talent everywhere. I'll be surprised if we don't see them back in sort of the Western Conference Finals again this year, even with Russell Westbrook getting another year older.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Does like the thing about these teams like the Suns and the Kings that sure that one or maybe two key contributor might either regress or be gone, but they got like 6 or 7 guys that are developing that can step up right at the same time. So, did they really lose anything? Not really. So.
No, exactly. That's the main thing. As if you're a powerhouse that's competing every year, if you don't lose anything, even if you regress, you're still going to be up there. And if you
Exactly.
can add, picks and future younger players who will make that development, the gap should be less. So that's exactly what the Kings do, and one of the teams to beat again next year, I think. So, moving on to the Golden State Warriors, a team that has had quite an upheaval this offseason. They were 42-40 last year, so they scraped into the playoffs and were bounced straight back out, I believe. But in terms of losses, just to give you a sense, Gary, they lost obviously James Harden, Tim Quarterman, Jabari Bird, and Jeff Teague. But they did manage to pick up PJ Dozier, PJ Tucker, James McAdoo, and Brandon Knight. So they've picked up a couple of solid players, but obviously losing James Harden is a massive blow for any team. Probably this roster is not going to stay as it is, I think, for Golden State. I think Jeff is set on trying to rebuild now, but based on current structure, do you see the Golden State Warriors being back in the playoffs this year?
If it's a team with this roster right now, no, I think they're gonna barely miss the playoffs just because Kevin Durant's sure is still very good, but he regressed once again due to his age. And then you got guys like PJ Dozier. It's a unique piece, really good young player. I like him a lot, but I just don't think that he's even close to being of an impactful player like James Harden was. And you got solid guys like Guler, Boban, and Vonleh, but none of those guys are really going to be guys that can carry you to a playoff. So he's doing the right thing here and just slowly tear this piece by piece, sell off the older pieces, and start a rebuild. I mean, they have all their first round draft picks. Might as well start building around a piece like PJ Dozier. I was just really surprised that they didn't use that cap space from the departure of James Harden onto another maybe one or two impactful in prime pieces, guys like Briante Weber or something like that. So I was kind of surprised by that.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
you know,
I think they did. I think they tried to get a few guys, the Warriors. I think they just, for whatever reason, couldn't get them, which meant they had to go with a couple of different options, as we saw. But I mean, I look at this team, and even with Kevin Durant still there, I think this is a playoff team in the Western Conference. I think they'll still be a .500 team. I mean, I'll just read what I probably think would be their starting five if they go currently. So at point guard, they'll have Euler. At shooting guard, they'll probably have Brandon Knight. Then they'll probably put PJ Dozier in at small forward. Then Durant, and then at the sort of center position, you probably play. If it was me, I'd probably play Boban. And he won't last the full more than 22 minutes, but he's solid. And and then you look at the bench, you've got PJ Tucker, James McAdoo, Jerry Grant, I think is vastly underrated, as is Deng Deng, and Mitchell Robinson, who is developing. And that's, to me, screams a team that is .500 still. Oh, and I've even talked about Vonleh as well. And he had a pretty good season last year.
Yeah, I think this team definitely still has some talent left, but I just definitely think that going the rebuild route is probably the smartest way to go with this team at this point, especially with being in a division with the Suns and the Kings. I think they pretty much cap out their potential with KD on the team. So might as well just trade them away. Some of these role players they have, what would be a good team to have them? The Pelicans. The Pelicans somehow find a way to acquire some of these guys to help out their depth. Bam, they could be up there.
Yeah, I mean, if the Pelicans could swing something to try and get, Durant, that could be interesting because that's just another elite scorer that they probably need, just in case Davis or George go down, and just another option for the defense to have to worry about.
Yep.
That could be interesting, but
I feel bad for Jeff, man. Just losing James Harden. Even though they give him more money and more years, but man, it's unfortunate.
It's tough, and we saw it happen with the Clippers a couple of years ago, and it's taken a little while for them to rebuild because of GM transitions. So I think with Golden State and Jeff, I think they'll be in a better shape quicker than the Clippers were. And we've seen that already with some of the signings. But yeah, I mean, it's a good opportunity for someone like Jeff to build the team in his own image. And, what a great way to do that if you've got a draft coming up that looks pretty good and pretty deep this year. So, yeah, a great opportunity to do that as well.
Yep.
So moving on to the first of the last two teams and the first of the LA teams, the Los Angeles Clippers, who were 28 and 54 last year. Have had some significant additions though this year. Losing Mo Harkless, Gary Harris, Tyler Ellis, and John L. Stokes, but picking up Colin Sexton, Travis Trice, Inglis, who you know about, Gary, and Batum, who you know about as well, and also picking up Capella. This team has added quite a lot of talent this year. So I don't expect them to be at 28 wins mark this year. I don't know about you, but Mario has on with another year and some of these additions. What significant jump do you see the Clippers making?
This should be one of the more improved teams in the league this year. I mean, looking at the roster, it's like the freaking my old Wizards here, half my old teams here. So, and they all make the playoffs, so hopefully maybe they can compete for the playoff spot. But there's some pretty good pieces here. If Hazonia, if he can continue to work on his preference and make him a little bit more efficient, then he's going to be a very good number one offensive option. And you got guys like Inglis, Batum, and Capella, who are all very solid veterans who knows their roles and do their job well. And Travis Trice and Colin Sexton, I think, is a pretty intriguing young backup point guard duel, as both guys have two-way ability. And you got young guys like Harry Giles, along with Chimezie Metu. Those two guys are pretty good young big man there. And I know Enes Kanter, everybody hates him because of his crappy contract, just like in real life. But you look at his career stat wise, I mean, that guy can produce when given the minutes. This team has, they even brought back Ivek Zubac, and they got Raul Alkins, who was pretty high on as a potential future six man. I mean, this team has a lot of good players. I feel like good young players, value. I think the key is just that either Dylan's going to try to consolidate for a big piece or just kind of ride it out and trying to acquire more assets to build in the future. But this team should improve a lot just based on the talent alone. I mean, hearing these names just reminds me of my old team, and I think they're good players, so I think they should improve a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I think they'll improve a lot. I don't think they'll be a playoff team, but I think they can certainly aim. I think that in terms of limits, I think they'll be between sort of 33 wins and 40 wins. I think so. They'll be either a sort of middle tier team, but not quite good enough to make the playoffs this year. But I think the additions they've made have been really good additions, even down to someone like Lance Stevenson, who can still add value. And they've got a good starting five now that can compete every single night, which is a massive plus for the Clippers. It's all about whether Hazonia can make that jump to still be an elite scorer. But I don't necessarily know where the second option is coming from at the moment. Maybe he's hoping that'll be Inglis, but I'm not too sure.
Yeah, if Harry Giles can develop and get the proper preference work, I think he can actually be a second option on that team. Because I remember when I scouted him, he had a really high potential as a scorer, a guy that can score inside and shoot a jumper and dunk the ball really well, and block shots really well as well. And he can even draw fouls and hit free throws. So he's definitely raw, but I think if he develops well, he could be the second option behind Hasonia.
That's interesting. So we'll keep an eye out for him at training camp then to see how he does. Because I think he's still quite raw at the moment, isn't he?
Yeah, he got drafted when he was 19, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, Clippers probably improving, but probably not quite a playoff team yet, but some good moves. And
Yep.
I guess we'll round out the Western Conference with the final team, the other LA team, the LA Lakers, who were 27 and 55 last year. Made some significant roster moves this year, though. Obviously, moving up in the draft, I should say, to pick up Zanan Musa, I believe is the name. Dikembe Dixon later on in the draft managed to grab D'Angelo Russell in free agency and DeMar DeRozan through trade as well. This is a team that's probably an upward projection, but I guess they're not going to be playoffs, but where do you kind of see the Lakers panning out this year?
I think they'll improve a little bit just because the younger guys would develop, and getting somebody like Musa should help them out a little bit, along with Marvin Bagley's improvement and the other young guys, like some of the rookies, like even Check Diallo is still improving. So
Hmm.
this team, I think what Tim's doing for right now, just mess around, experiment to see what guys can actually keep in the long term, as they're looking for a long term rebuild. I think what he's really looking for is find the guys that are capable of translating into a new engine. So I think it's going to be built around Marvin Bagley, and whoever can fit in the new engine will stay around. If not, they'll be traded away for more future assets. And he also got quite a few guys that are coming off the books next year. So this team is definitely a long-term project, kind of like the Bucks. And I think with patience and smart, savvy moves, this team's going to have a really bright future. And for the D'Angelo Russell signing, it's been talked about a lot already, so I'm not going to beat on a dead horse, but I think it's a good move for the state of a franchise because, with not many alpha dogs on this team, I think Russell's going to put some really, really good numbers. And, Tim has been known as a guy that can help guys have kind of like a shady reputation to become really good players, like Giannis, Check Diallo, and I think DeMar DeRozan, he turned him around as well. So I think Russell could have a really career year here and eventually get traded for some future assets. So just everything is about the future for the Lakers, and hopefully for the city of Los Angeles, either the Clippers or Lakers will eventually become a winner, because another LA ride's going to happen soon if those guys don't start winning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Lakers, as you said, are on a developing transition at the moment. And I know when I spoke to Tim about the roster and the draft and where he's going, he's definitely building up players who he think will make significant jumps in the new DDS engine due to either the change in transition from the guarding to who handles the ball to the increased amount of ability of ball movement actions. Um, so I think that's the direction of travel he's going. Which at the moment in current DDS, there's some players that won't be as good because of that, but it's all about the new engine, and I think he's hoping that when we get to the new engine, the Lakers will make that jump. The younger players will make that jump, and that difference to move away finally from being a lottery team to being back into being a playoff position. So I think that's the direction of travel. I think this year the Lakers will probably be hoping for as little wins as possible because of the draft again. Um, I
Yeah.
mean, if they could add someone to Marvin Bagley, who's an elite player, I mean, on the rookie contract, this team will definitely be in a very steep upward trajectory going into the new engine, which would be a great position from where this team was probably 2-3 seasons ago.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. I mean, just imagine a team of Marvin Bagley, Tree. Look at the build of this. What I know now is that he's getting a lot. He's getting a lot of guys that are tall. It's a really lanky team. Besides Kiefer Suggs, who is
Yeah.
on his future plans, everybody's pretty much tall. A really, really lanky team. Maybe trying to move to the real life Sixers. And what results you can get from all these tall, lanky players.
Yeah, that's true. I think, yeah, it's interesting to see that it's quite a tall team, very similar to the Philadelphia 76ers, as you said, in the NBA. So, yeah, interesting direction of travel. I hadn't quite noticed that until you said it. So, yeah, maybe maybe he's onto something there with the new engine and height being more of a significant factor than it probably is in the current engine. So maybe that's one of the reasons,
Yeah.
but we won't necessarily know until we move to that new engine.
Yep. For sure. Position in real life. So maybe he's thinking that the new engine would kind of transition into that type of style of basketball.
Yeah, true, very true. So I guess that kind of wraps up our Western Conference preview for the coming season. I guess in terms of the tiers, we kind of discussed it in the Eastern Conference preview, but where do you kind of see those tiers sitting this year for the Western Conference?
Yeah, I think the big three is going to be the Suns, the Kings, and the Rockets. And it depends on what OKC does. It could be up there as well. But for now, I'm gonna assume that OKC is gonna try to go for like a semi rebuild route. So I think top tier Rockets, Suns, Kings. Second tier, the Trailblazers, the Thunder, and maybe even the Pelicans. And then the third tier, I think it's gonna be the Nuggets, Jazz, along with maybe somebody like a Spurs can sneak in. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, for me, I'd probably put the Nuggets in the second tier as well, if because of the Tatum jump that I'm expecting. But yeah, I probably kind of agree with you. It's probably, as it has been for many years, the Western Conference has a top tier. There's an elite tier. There's probably a sort of second tier that's probably a playoff teams, but not nowhere near as good as the elite teams in the conference. And then there's probably about another sort of four or five teams that are sort of in that playoff mix, but probably lower playoff seeds. And it all depends on matchup for those guys, who they get. But it's been great to have you on, Gary, to chat about the Western Conference. Best of luck with the season. And I'm sure we'll be back at some point through the season to talk about draft, lottery, moves, trades, who knows what. But it's been great to have a bit of a look about at the Western Conference and to see who we think's going to do really well. Probably look at the lottery already, and teams that will be fighting for playoff spots.
Yeah, thanks for having me on once again. I think this is. I mean, Western Conference sure might looks got weaker on paper, but you still got the top dogs up there that's going to be in it. So it's been interesting to see if my conference can actually dethrone them this year. So it'll be really interesting to see, and the PG and Anthony Davis storyline is going to be very interesting to keep up with.
It will be, absolutely, and we'll see how the Pelicans do this year.
Yep. Thanks for having me on.